Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And again, I'm going to be talking about finding the right research participants. So Dana talked a lot about kind of getting in touch with people. So hopefully this talk will give you, excuse me, much more detailed information about how to dig in and find those participants. Okay, is this good? Okay. All right, so I'm going to begin my talk with a quote and something that is somewhat blasphemous for a UX conference, which is that I'm going to pick apart something that Steve Krug said. So if you're not familiar with Steve Krug, he is most famous for writing a couple of books, one called Don't Make Me Think and one called Rocket Surgery Made Easy, that really breaks down the process of usability testing. And among them, he has several maxims that he sort of puts out into the world to try to encourage people to usability test, and one of them is recruit loosely and grade on a curve, which basically what he means by that is that even if you don't have exactly the right participants for usability test, you can still find a lot of good information. And he's not totally wrong. He is Steve Krug, after all. But he's not totally right either. So yes, theoretically, if you are building something, whether it's a web interface or a mobile app or something, a lot of things should be easy enough for most everyone to figure out. However, sometimes you need just the right people. How many people have any idea what this is? Right, probably not, because this is a tax form for the state of Georgia for filing taxes when you work in the film and entertainment industry. Last year, I had the ever so thrilling project of testing some tax software. And we went through a long process with our client of getting in touch with tax accountants and making sure that we had people who were very familiar filing and paying taxes on behalf of their clients. And about 4 participants into a 20-person usability test, still nobody had found this form. And we couldn't really tell if it's because the form was hard to find in the system, which probably it was because the system was terrible. But we also realized when we finally showed people this form, none of them had any idea what it was. And it became very clear immediately to us that it was hard to determine whether or not our participants weren't able to find this thing because they didn't know what it was and they therefore didn't know what to search for or what category to look under, or because it really just was difficult to find. Sometimes people basically assume that a usability study or a research study of some kind is an opportunity to complain. That happens, that's okay. I once had a very, very drunk person show up at 1 p.m. At 1 p.m. It was for a shampoo. I don't know. A colleague of mine had his ex-girlfriend show up for a study. I don't think they could have screened her out, but that was awkward, to say the least. I had another colleague of mine tell me that a participant stole money. He was being recorded. He was in a usability lab. I don't know what that participant was thinking, but those are all kind of extreme and funny cases. It's not always that egregious, but I want to actually revisit something that Dana has said, which is that the quality of the research that we're able to do is really dependent on the quality of the participant that we're able to bring into those studies. So with that in mind, I'm going to run through some of the kind of list of things that I make sure that I run through when I'm running a research study, whether it's a usability test or an interview or doing some ethnography. Kind of run through the list of things that I make sure that I look at so that I make sure I get the right people into my studies. So the first one sounds really straightforward. It's define who you want to talk to. But it turns out this is a little bit harder than sometimes it seems. So you really kind of want to think about who exactly are you looking for? Why are you looking for them right now? What sort of questions do you want to ask? Just wait, the memes get better. What kind of study are you doing, and why is it important that those particular people are in the study at this point? So for instance, with Dana was talking about needing low literacy people. Well, why is it important that she's talking to them? Well, because half of adults have trouble reading, right? And sometimes this is really easy to find. So especially if you already have personas. I know that personas are a topic of hot debate right now. There's a lot of hate out there. I could have a whole other 45-minute session about that. I won't have that debate, except for to say that my opinion is that if you're using personas well, they can be very useful. So if you've done a bunch of research about who your users are, and you know really well who you want to target, great, use your personas. But how many of you in this room have like personas good and ready to go and researched and like rocking? Okay, that's an awful lot of you who don't have that. So what do you do otherwise? Well, the good news is you don't need to have a formal persona to figure out a target. So if you're very just first starting out, excuse me, you can make something called a proto-persona, which is basically a hypothesis about who you want to talk to and why. So it's really simple activity that you can look up. Basically, you have a workshop session with your stakeholders and other teammates and anyone who's kind of familiar with your user base, and distill the information that you do know, or distill the information about the type of people that you want to target. Now, depending on what kind of research you're doing, maybe you're using this proto-persona as a starting place to explore the rest of your personas and kind of build on them. Maybe not. Maybe you're doing a usability study and you just need to define some pretty basic things about people, like how literate they are, or what amount of experience they have with the tool that you're building or something. But at the very, very least, you want to define who you don't want to talk to. You won't usually recruit scary clowns or drunk people, but sometimes it's easier to work backwards and say, I know that I don't want to talk to people who have already had a lot of experience with things. For instance, if you're working on an onboarding trait, or an onboarding process, you can say, I don't want to talk to existing users, I want to talk to new users or potential users, right? So sometimes it's easier to work backwards, but at the very least, define who you don't want to talk to and be really specific about that. Then, translate all of those things into a screener. Screeners are one of those things that sound really easy to do, but when it comes to actually writing them, a lot of people have trouble. And when I do consulting work, sometimes I work, I'm kind of the sole person on a team, but very often I am working with an existing UX team who maybe doesn't have a ton of UX research experience. And all kinds of people get really nervous about writing screeners and really nervous about the best way to phrase them. So let me just let you in on a little secret. There are really well-defined rules for writing surveys, and a screener is basically just a specialized survey. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you ask precise questions. So if I asked you, what snack is most delicious and nutritious, what would you all say? Carrot. Okay, well, again, I heard someone say it's a trick question. That's because what snack is most delicious is not the same as what snack is most nutritious. So probably a carrot is the most nutritious. But I personally don't vote carrots as the most delicious one. And this is kind of a silly example, but very often in screeners, people try to lump questions together so that they can ask fewer questions and have a shorter screener. And theoretically, that's nice, except for that then what ends up happening is you get people who can't answer honestly or reasonably. When you have to pick the thing that is most delicious and nutritious from this list, you're not going to get the truest answer for either the most delicious or the most nutritious. You'll get kind of something in between. And to further that note, you need to make sure that your answers are really precise. So, what happens if you shower every 3 days? Which one do you choose? I promise I did take a shower today. But the answer is, there is no right answer if you write the questions this way. And again, it's a silly example, but making sure that you have answers that are very particular. How often do you go to the grocery store? Well, I don't know. What does pretty often mean? Is pretty often once a week? Is pretty often once a month? Is pretty often 3 times a week? You just don't know. And again, these are all kind of silly examples, but you would be surprised. I look at a lot of surveys and a lot of screeners, and the amount of times that I have been, so for reference, not only do I do research mostly for my day-to-day work, but I always am the person out of I think professional curiosity who agrees to fill these things out and sign up for them. I'm in basically every toll panel because I'm like, ooh, what are other people doing? And time after time after time, people are like, how familiar are you with this thing? Very familiar, sort of familiar, not familiar. I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that. So be very, very precise. A better way to ask that, especially when it comes to time, is to actually just be really precise and use numbers. Every day is a whole lot different than a few times a week, which is a whole lot different than once a month. And there's another thing to point out here, which is that I don't go to grocery stores. Some people don't. Instacart is fairly new where I live in Durham, and I have a friend who has decided that going to the grocery store is not something she's willing to do anymore. She will not go. She literally has not been in 6 months. I haven't quite been able to bite the bullet and pay for that myself yet, but with the previous set of answers, she didn't really have a good answer. So make sure that you have appropriate answers. Okay, if you ask someone if they are sassy, classy, or bad, see? Maybe the answer is this. All of them, duh. But maybe it's this. Maybe it's none of them. And again, that's sort of a silly example, but very often we are looking for such specific things in people that we don't consider the fact that they might be all or multiple or just two or none of the things that we're looking for. And we kind of bake in assumptions about who we think people might be when we don't allow for all of the above or none of the above or some combination of things. And I know that when you're doing a screening, you're trying to get through things quickly and you're trying to get at specific things. But when you ask things imprecisely, it leads people to lie accidentally. And you want to make it really easy to answer, right? Like, if you have bought a television in the last month, you'll remember that. If you asked me what I ate for breakfast last Tuesday, I would have no idea. So you have to make it easy for people to answer. It has to be information that they know, but not too easy. Because what that question before basically asked was, would you like to be in our study? Another little secret. If someone is filling out a screener that you have put out there, they want to be in your study. They won't bother if they don't want to. So make sure that you are not super explicit about what you're looking for. Try something like this instead. So if you need to make sure, for instance, that you've spoken to someone who has made a large purchase in the last year or in the last month, ask them multiple things and don't make it very clear which particular thing you're looking for. You'll know right away. It's still easy to screen for. They should still be able to easily answer that. Yes, I know if I've bought a tablet or television. Excuse me. But it's a little bit less obvious what you're looking for. The other sort of advice for that is something that we call masking, which means that you can have multiple correct answers. If you, for instance, need to talk to someone who spends 20 hours or more a week on the internet, and you make your kind of screening question answers, how much time do you spend on the internet? 0 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 16, 17 to 20, and 21 or more, then the 21 or more cutoff is pretty obvious. But you can break it down and have multiple right answers. So in the case that I wanted to talk to someone who owned 3 or more devices, whether they picked 3 or 4 or 5 or more, all of those would kind of make it in to the screener, but they wouldn't be cued off that 3 was the cutoff. And all of this kind of screening best practice goes back to my point that if they're bothering to take the screener, people want to be in your study. And hopefully you're not getting sort of the dreaded professional tester or professional participant who just tries to sign up for every single thing. But again, if somebody is bothering to click on a link or whatever, and we'll get to that in a second, but if somebody is bothering to take some time to give to you to fill out a form, they want to be in your study. And make sure that you prioritize the questions appropriately. So if you are doing a study, for instance, where you need to speak to parents, ask that first. There's some debate with surveys in general and with screeners in particular, whether you ask some warm-up questions to kind of get people used to answering, to which I say, bullshit. Because if you ask someone 20 questions about who they are and what they're looking for, and then the actual question that would screen them out is 13 questions in, and then they get screened out, they're just going to be mad at you. If you ask them that first, and then immediately say, thanks, but no thanks, they didn't lose as much. And yeah, 13 questions isn't that much time, but again, people are in some way, whether it's because you're incentivizing them or they're just interested in the study, they want to be there. So prioritize and put the things that are most important for you that you do or do not want to talk to, put that first. And keep in mind that depending on who you're talking to, a screener might be your very first interaction with a person, with your brand or your company or whatever it is that you're introducing them to. If they're existing users, then they already come with a set of experiences, good or bad. But if they're brand new and their first experience with your product is answering 38 questions and then getting screened out on the last one, they're not going to love you. And they're going to carry that with them wherever they go because, to Dana's point, experiences are cumulative. So whether they're good or bad, they will get carried. And that may be just a small one, but it is a big bad world out there, and any little negative thing that you do to your customers, they will remember, and it will carry with them. So when it comes to screeners, some general tips. Follow the standard rules of crafting survey questions. Prioritize the questions in order of what you want to qualify first or disqualify first. Ask really only what you need to, and set the stage for a good interaction throughout the rest of the study, which we'll talk more about. Okay, so awesome. You've written a screener and you're good to go, and you're like, sweet, where do I screen people from? Good news, bad news. Recruiting can be tough. It is not always easy to find the people that you're looking for, but there are lots and lots of options. And there are more than ever before, and this is part of the reason it's really important to have a good screener because there are so many options, there's more opportunities to get in touch with people, but there's also more opportunities to get in touch with the wrong people. So, some options. If you are lucky enough to be an established company and have an established user base of some kind, you can use the existing channels that you already have to get in touch with them, even if they don't think that they are supposed to be participating in user experience studies of some kind. You can use things like if you've got a support team and people reach out to support with a complaint or a question, you can ask them if they're interested in being part of your studies ongoing when you're working on that thing. If you have an existing social media presence, you can reach out to people via social media. You just make a digital version of your screener and post a link to it. This also works when you don't actually have existing participants or existing users and you're just looking for general users. I have had very good luck recruiting on Facebook recently. And depending on who I'm talking to, I've used Craigslist. Again, super important that you have a good screener. That's actually not where the drunk guy came from, believe it or not. But you can use kind of the public posting. You can use things like if you are looking for people who are interested in fitness. Recently, I was working on a health and fitness app. I happen to be a fitness instructor, so I posted the screener in the Facebook group for all of the other instructors. And to Dana's point also earlier, I asked them to tell their friends. So you can use kind of existing networks and existing groups of people or existing methods of communication, even if they're not explicitly for recruiting. Any touch point that you already have with customers, you can, or users of whatever kind, you can use. One way that I particularly like to do this, and it doesn't have to be with users, but it does have to be with visitors. If you're working on some sort of website or application, I really love digital intercepts. So this is a screenshot of a tool called Ethnio, which is really great. If you're not familiar with it, I've used it a lot, but you can do this with basically any of those bazillion little pop-up survey tools. Recently, I was working with Twilio, and we were working on restructuring some of their knowledge base. And kind of on a whim, the contact that I was working with was like, hey, do you think that we could recruit people, like 40 of them for interviews next week? And I was like, what? You've clearly never done user research before. That's insane. But I thought about it a little bit, and I was like, all right, well, how many people do you have come visit your knowledge base every day? It was a lot. I was like, all right, well, you already have this kind of survey pop-up question. How many people respond to that every day? It was less lot, but still a lot. So I added 2 questions to see if people would be interested in me reaching out to them. And I went to sleep about 11:30 on a Tuesday night. And on Wednesday morning, I woke up I used Powwow, which I'll talk about in a second. Powwow is a scheduling tool. I woke up with my entire next 3 weeks schedule full, which was awesome. But she forgot to set the limit. We were only supposed to recruit like 30 people. My point is that using the traffic and the visitors that are already there is awesome, because you know that they are naturally actually visiting there. They're already, even if they're not real users, they're at least visitors. So there's a sort of natural interest that they have in whatever you're going to be talking about. But just be aware when you are recruiting people who are existing users of the halo effect. So the halo effect sounds good. It's not always good. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad. It's basically the term for the fact that whatever experience somebody has with you or your brand or your company, they will carry with them to whatever new interaction. So for instance, if you recruit someone who called into the support channel or support line at your company to complain about something, and you then have them in a usability test, they are going to bring that negative experience with them. Vice versa, if you've got a really super excited user who loves you and is very engaged with your brand, and you include them in usability studies, they will naturally overlook things or blame themselves. People do this a little bit anyway, but it is especially true when someone already has a positive experience. So other than crafting your research questions well and not being leading, which is, again, a separate topic, you can't do much about it in the screening process, but it is important to know to try to diversify your screening so that you're not always talking to either people who are already in love with your brand or people who are already upset. Try to mix it up so that you don't always get the same sort of bias with that. And a pro tip is that no matter how you end up reaching people, I super recommend making your own tool panel. So this happens to be a blurred out version of a Google Doc that I share with one of my clients. You can see it's super straightforward. It just says name, email, phone, persona type. So for that particular client, they have personas that they categorize people into every time we talk to them. And they have a little thing that says last contacted and then some notes. This is kind of the most simple, basic version of it. There are lots of tools that do this. There are lots of tools that are trying to do this. If you have an existing CRM, you can modify that. At a previous company that I worked at, we used Salesforce, and we made a custom, basically, version of a contact with a bunch of custom fields that ask these same questions. But Google is free. So I used this with that client. And the important things here are that you can have a list of people who you can reach out to at any time, but you can also take little notes to be like, yeah, that's the guy who showed up drunk. Maybe don't invite him again. Or that's the woman who showed up and complained for 45 minutes and didn't answer any of my questions. Maybe I won't invite her again. Or even just things like, well, I've included these same 10 people in the last 3 studies. It's time for me to get some new people in and get a different set of perspective. But so I really love to take notes on what people have previously been in so that I can make sure, sometimes I purposely want new people, sometimes I purposely want the same people to see a new thing or to interview them about 2 different things or something. But having a little bit of a log of that, even a very simple jotted down Google note, can be really helpful when you're looking to recruit. And in one case, when I very much trusted the people who were in my panel, I gave them access to it, and I asked them, not the note part, but the contact information part, and I asked them to nominate friends of theirs or colleagues of theirs to be contacted. And they had to get permission, and we had to make sure that it was okay with them. But I pretty much overnight went from about 35 people to about 200 people in my panel by doing that. So however you do it, I super recommend that you kind of keep your own list of people. Great, so all of that is wonderful if you have something existing and you've got people to reach out to and you know who you're looking for. But what if you're like, I'm working on this brand new thing, it's not live yet, it's a startup, we're not even totally sure who our users are. Well, I would recommend that you need to do some research about who your users are, but also to get in touch with people. One really simple thing that is coming up more and more is that a lot of the online usability and user experience tools have their own tool panels. So this is a screenshot of the screener from Optimal Workshop, who I'm friends with the folks there. They're starting to get more and more kind of up to date with this. So there's a giant caveat in that there's typically not a ton of screening you can do, but the pro is that if you're in the vein of, I just need to get some quick feedback and I have a little bit of money but not a lot, you can get people usually really fast. Most of the tools you can get feedback in 24 hours. There's also all sorts of like specialty ones. So there's all of these tools have different versions of panels, and this is useful mostly in different geographies. So Netizen is mostly in Asia. Testasso is in Brazil. I've used them. Turns out my Portuguese is not good, but they also have bilingual account support people, which is very helpful for me. What users do actually just got purchased by UserZoom, so they're one and the same now. But anyway, all of these tools, if you're already doing one of these types of tests, like a card sort or an online usability test or a click test, and you need very general participants, all of these places, and probably lots more that I don't know of, but all of these places for sure have built-in tool panels. And that is especially awesome where you're in a case like me where maybe you have a client who's in New Zealand. No, I don't get to visit them. It's very sad. And the users we need to talk to are in Europe, and I'm in the States. That is a really big challenge because there are cultural differences, there are time zone differences, there are language differences. Yes, New Zealand English and American English, although both English, sometimes hard for us to understand each other. And even the people who we're talking to often who speak English in other countries in Europe, also their English is a bit different than ours. So some of these tool panels are really great because you get to talk to people quickly in the place that they are and let them use the language that they're used to. And what about if you're looking for really high specialty people? So I know I met at least like 2 people so far who work in the medical industry. Does anybody else have really hard to find users like medical professionals or lawyers? Yeah, a handful. Okay, so these aren't great necessarily for all of them. What I really recommend in those cases is that you leverage relationships as best you can, but sometimes you can use these dedicated research panels. So Respondent.io and user interviews are both fairly new. I find that they're best for fairly general, but there's a whole bunch of like market research kind of recruiting firms that can get you really specialized people. The con is that there's definitely a cost associated. That's their whole business model. What they own is the database of people. But they're usually able to help you find really particular people. And I've always had good luck with having pretty high quality and high response rate and not getting a lot of no-shows and that kind of thing. So if you have a lot of budget and you need really particular people, this is a good one. Next, the beloved guerrilla usability testing or guerrilla ethnography is live intercepting. So I used to work at Staples Corporate, and at least once a month they'd be like, hey, just go to Natick and like see what you can find. Just go talk to people. Sometimes we had prototypes, sometimes we were just doing interviews. And this can be really awesome if you're looking to get particular types of people. I needed to make sure I was talking to Staples shoppers. They were indeed Staples shoppers because they were in the store. This can be really great when you are looking for particular sorts of people. So again, if you're looking for low literacy people, maybe hang out in barbershops and certain neighborhoods. This can be awesome, but you have to be really careful. Because, I know, take a moment to appreciate this. This is a real picture from the zoo in London. that, that I couldn't believe was real, and I took a picture, and I keep sneaking it into presentations because I just love it. It gives me joy when I'm practicing. But you have to be really careful about intercepting people for lots of reasons. One thing is that if someone is just trying to go get their coffee and they're in a rush in the morning and you stop them, their immediate reaction probably, and I know Vermonters are very polite and nice, and so they'd probably be nice about it, but their probably first reaction isn't like, oh yes, let me sit down and give you very detailed, in-depth feedback. It's like, I have to get to work, I'm already running late, I just need caffeine, leave me alone. And that's not always the case, but you have to be really careful about intercepting people, especially if you're going to be talking about sensitive information, sex, money, health, who you vote for, political associations. If you're going to be talking about really sensitive information, probably not best to accost someone in a coffee shop and ask to record their thoughts, right? So I would say in general, focus this kind of thing on when you know that you are in a location where you could recruit a particular type of people. For instance, hang out in a gym if you're working on a fitness app. Maybe don't hang out in the donut shop if you're working on a fitness app. Maybe that's not the right place. But so there's a lot of choices, like I said, and all the time I get asked this question, which is, which one is best? Where should I recruit from? I don't know. The answer is totally dependent on your context. It totally depends what you're trying to do, who you're trying to reach, what your budget is, what stage of the process you're in. So I can't give you that answer unless I spend a lot of time with you and get to know your problem well. But I did this handy dandy slide that you shouldn't take a picture of because it's terrible slide design, but I will share with you and you can reference later. Okay, so you've done all this hard work. You've gotten people to show up or to scheduled. You're all good, and now you need to get them to show up, especially if you've scheduled them in advance. How many people here have ever had a in-person study scheduled where they didn't have a single no-show? Yeah? Okay, I've only had it happen twice in about a decade. And there was only 2 people who raised their hand, which leads me to believe that many of you have had research sessions where there are no-shows. And to some degree, that's to be expected. Stuff happens, traffic comes up, people have work emergencies or family emergencies. But there's an awful lot of stuff you can do to set things up well from the beginning so that people actually show up. So the first thing is make it easy for them to show up. Make it easy for them to schedule time and be really explicitly clear about what they are signing up for. Is it going to be online? If so, will they need to download something to connect with you? Is it Zoom or Skype or GoToMeeting or Uber conference or whatever? And if so, do they need to prepare for that? Are you going to be asking them to share their screen? You would not believe how many people have porn on all the time in the background. All the time. Prepare people so that they maybe don't share it with you because it's awkward. Make it easy for them, though, to not only know what to expect in terms of what they're expected to do, but make it easy for them to find time. So this is a screenshot of a tool called Powwow that I use. There's lots of them. There's Calendly and a whole bunch of other ones. I like this one in particular. Let people sign themselves up rather than the inevitable chain of emails and phone calls and text messages about, oh, actually, I can't do that time. Can you do 15 minutes earlier? Well, no, that overlaps with this other meeting. Can we meet 20 minutes later? No, how about Tuesday? No, on Powwow, you just go and set up when you are available, and then people can sign up for them. And if they are no longer available, then they can cancel it and reschedule. It's super simple. And be really clear, like I said, about following up with people. Don't be afraid to send reminders. This is a kind of a typical week snapshot from last year. That's actually kind of a light week for me. Not that busy. I have a lot going on, and almost everyone I talk to has a lot going on, whether it's at their desk or people I'm talking to next week work on cruise ships. They have a lot going on too. People forget stuff all the time. Don't be afraid to send reminders the day before and an hour before and 15 minutes before. It's okay. If they've signed up to give you their feedback and they want to spend time with you, that's not a problem. It's not annoying. It's actually sometimes helpful. I more than one time have been on a call that was running over and been like, oh, that next thing is happening in 15 minutes. Okay, really got to wrap it up. Got to go. So taking out basically all of the logistical work you can from the users and making it as easy as possible for them and give them expectations so that they know what they're signing up for. There's no surprises. And then finally, give something to get something. So it's not a secret that humans are reciprocal human beings. Very few of us, if ever, just give something out of the goodness of our own heart because there's nothing we want out of it. Very frequently, we think about money and gift cards, and that's great. But think about what your users would value. I mentioned that I did some work with Twilio, and their user base was really engaged, and they were psyched just to have us send them swag. We sent t-shirts, and they were really happy with that. The year before last, I was working on a project with college students. We bought pizza. We ran out of room. We had so many people show up. It cost me about, I think it was like $35 to get like 50 people to come and show up. Whereas I could not get 50, say, lawyers or medical professionals for $50. But really think about what your users value and what will express to them that you appreciate their time, their effort, their energy, and what will be something that they actually value, not just that they kind of take as a token. Okay, but fine, really. Mostly they want cash. I get it. I also like cash and gift cards. So then the question becomes, how much? Again, it totally depends. It depends on your context. It depends on what you're asking them to do. It depends on how frequently you're tapping into them. It depends on what sort of expertise you're looking for. For instance, excuse me. Again, for instance, I've been doing some medical work. We have to pay surgeons a lot more than we have to pay receptionists and administrative staff. That's just true. So just be conscious of that. There is no right or wrong answer. But when in doubt, get a little extra budget rather than going low, because nobody likes to feel undervalued. And keep in mind that besides giving someone something tangible, after you take their feedback and do something with it, people like to know that what they told you had an impact, that you did something with it. They like to feel important. So for instance, when I was working on some email marketing software, we would send release notes out, and there was a section of the release notes where we thanked all of the usability test participants that gave us the okay to use their first name. We had never gotten, it wasn't intentionally a PR move, but we had never gotten so many excited, positive comments in our whole existence. So many people contacted us and were like, yeah, that's me. That was my feedback. That's awesome. We had people like tweeting about it and posting on Facebook that like they should probably be a designer now because their feedback had changed our product, which I didn't agree with, but it was good to know they were excited. So keep in mind that the value that you give to people doesn't have to end when the session ends. You can continue to provide them value and appreciating their time far after the course of the research. And what about longitudinal studies? So I don't have time to dig into all of this, but there's lots of research that shows if you give people everything all at once, they very often peter out. And if you wait till the end to give everybody incentives, they very often don't get motivated enough to do it. So again, the answer is it depends on your context. But as a general rule, what I like to do with longitudinal studies, say a diary study, is pay people about 1/3 of the money after their first session and they get all set up. And they do all the things they need to kind of sign themselves up. And then depending on how long it is, maybe about halfway through, give them another 1/3 of their money or so. And then at the very end, give them the rest of the 1/3 that they were promised, and then maybe a little bonus at the very end to make sure that people stay motivated all the way through. But again, there is no right or wrong answer. It's really just a matter of kind of making sure that people continue to feel appreciated and valued. And of course, you're hoping that there's some intrinsic motivation, but depending on what you're working on, they might just be in it for the money, and that's okay. That's all right. But I want to encourage you to experiment. You don't have to know exactly the right thing. When we had the session with the college students, we weren't totally sure if pizza was going to be enough to get them there, and it turns out it was. And maybe next time we'll try ice cream or something even cheaper. I don't know. But don't be afraid to kind of experiment and really consider, just like with anything else you're crafting, really consider who you're trying to talk to and what they would value, and try out some different ways of getting in touch with them. So, in short, set clear expectations for people. Let them know exactly what they're signing up for, and try to get it so that if they don't want to do all those things, they don't sign up. Because it's better not to have someone sign up than to get kind of halfway through the process and poop out along the way. Value people's time and effort appropriately. Try to understand what they would value and give that back to them. Try exploring some non-cash incentives, but if you are going to use cash, do so appropriately. Show participants how their feedback made an impact, and don't pay longitudinal studies all at once. I've never had that work out well for me in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so in summary, in order to get the right research participants, these are very basic steps, but there's a lot that goes into them, so I kind of just want to leave you with this. Make sure that you define who you want to talk to and why it's important that you're talking to them. Translate those things into a screener that's well written. Find those people in the right places, and then get them to show up and value their time, so that hopefully we can all end with success. Thank you.